I was 6 months pregnant when my parents disowned me. Not just scolded, not disappointed. They cut me off, slammed the door in my face, told me to leave and never come back, as if I were nothing more than a shameful secret they couldn't wait to erase. I had no ring on my finger yet, no savings, and nowhere to go. But the part that still stings, they didn't even ask who the father was. They didn't care that I was alone, terrified, and carrying a life inside me. They cared about what the neighbors would think, about church gossip, about their fragile reputation. They made it clear their image meant more than their daughter. I left with a suitcase, a swollen belly, and a heart heavier than anything I'd ever carried. But they had no idea who I was about to become. The man I loved. He wasn't just a good man. He came from a family that owned half the skyline downtown, and they didn't just welcome me. They protected me, raised me, and handed me a crown my parents never believed I deserved. By the time my old life came crawling back, begging for forgiveness, it was already too late, because I was no longer the scared, disowned girl they cast out. I was a billionaire's wife. Before we go deep, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? My name is Eliza, and for most of my life, I believed that being quiet, obedient, and invisible was the safest way to survive in my family. My mother, Cynthia, ran the household like a PR firm. Every detail curated, every photo filtered, every smile forced. And my father, Martin, a strict accountant with no patience for emotional nonsense, valued two things above all: order and reputation. We weren't a warm family. We were a presentation. Holidays were for staged photos. Birthdays were judged by how little fuss we made. And as the eldest daughter, I carried the most weight. I had to be perfect, polished, and above all, silent. But silence has a cost. By the time I was 26, I had managed to do everything my parents expected, graduated with honors in business administration, landed a respectable job at a local finance firm, and kept my love life as hidden as a crime. They never asked about my feelings, my dreams, or who I spent my evenings with. As long as I showed up to church in a pressed dress and didn't draw attention, I was doing my job as their daughter. Then came Noah. He wasn't like anyone I'd ever met. Kind, grounded, and quietly confident. I met him at a volunteer event I coordinated for my firm. He was helping load donations into a truck when he offered me a bottle of water and a warm smile that somehow melted the ice I didn't know I was carrying. For weeks, we'd talk about books, politics, art. He never pushed. He just listened. And in a world where I was used to being a background prop in someone else's story, that meant everything. We dated quietly for a year. My parents never asked who I was seeing, and I never offered. He never flaunted wealth. He lived simply, wore plain jeans, drove a Toyota, took me to Whole, in-the-wall restaurants with better food than any white tablecloth place I'd ever been. And when he finally told me who he was, Noah Delacroix, son of industrial billionaire Victor Delacroix, I laughed. I thought he was joking, but he wasn't. He explained everything. How he kept his last name out of public records, how his family preferred privacy over publicity, how he walked away from his family's empire years ago to build something real on his own terms. I didn't care about any of that. I loved him long before I knew the name. Then, 2 pink lines changed everything. I was pregnant. It wasn't planned, but it wasn't a mistake either. Noah was overjoyed. He held me, kissed my forehead, and told me, "You're not doing this alone." I believed him. But I still believed I had to tell my parents. I hoped, deep down, that maybe this would be the moment they chose love over image, that they'd meet me with concern, maybe even cautious support. I was 6 months along before I had the courage to tell them. My body had started changing. My belly was visible, and there was no hiding it anymore. I wore a loose coat and walked into their house on a Saturday afternoon, trembling. They were in the kitchen, my mother making tea, my father reading the news. "I need to talk to you," I said. They didn't even look up. "I'm pregnant." Silence. Then my mother turned, stared at my belly, and laughed. It wasn't a kind laugh. It was bitter, sharp, cruel. "Is this some kind of joke?" My father folded the paper slowly. His eyes locked onto mine with disgust. "Are you married?" "No." "But..." He cut me off. "Then you've made your choice. They didn't ask about Noah. They didn't ask if I was okay. They didn't even ask if I had somewhere to go." My mother hissed. "You will not embarrass this family. Not here." And then they told me to leave, not calmly, not politely. They shouted. "My mother told me to go live with the man who ruined you," my father said. "If you want to live like trash, don't drag us into it." They disowned me. I stood in their hallway, 6 months pregnant, as my mother threw a duffel bag at my feet. She had already packed it, as if she knew this moment would come, and was waiting for it. I didn't cry. I just walked out. The night my parents disowned me, the wind was sharp, and the streets felt colder than ever before. I remember walking to the bus stop with that duffel bag digging into my shoulder, and my swollen belly cramping from the weight of it all. I checked into a dingy motel using the last of my savings. The walls were yellowed, the sheets smelled like old cigarettes, and the heater made a loud ticking sound that kept me up all night. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. All I could think about was my baby and the terrifying truth that I had no one. Noah was out of town on a business trip. I didn't want to ruin it. I didn't want him to see me like this, broken, rejected, unworthy, so I said nothing for 3 days. I rationed vending machine snacks. I avoided mirrors, and when I cried silently, so the neighbors wouldn't call management. But on the 3rd night, something inside me shattered. I clutched my stomach, afraid the stress would hurt the baby, and I picked up the phone. I called Noah. No lies, no pretending. I just whispered. They kicked me out. He didn't ask questions. He didn't lecture me. He just said, "Stay exactly where you are." 5 hours later, he was outside the motel, standing in the rain like a soldier, ready for war. He wrapped me in a coat, helped me into the car, and kissed my forehead with the gentleness I'd craved my entire life. And then he said words I'll never forget. "You'll never be alone again, I promise." At first, I thought he was taking me to his apartment, somewhere temporary, a place to catch my breath. But we drove out of the city, past highways and hills, until the landscape turned into something surreal. Long stone walls, iron gates, manicured hedges, and a driveway that seemed to stretch forever. We pulled up to an estate that looked like it had been carved out of a dream. 5 stories, slate rooftops, ivy-covered walls. The kind of place you only see in movies. Stonewell Estate, his childhood home. When I stepped out of the car, I froze. I was wearing old sweatpants, a puffy jacket, and shoes with holes in them. My hair was tangled. I looked like a walking disaster, and standing at the top of the stairs was his mother, Claudia Delacroix. She was everything my mother pretended to be, regal, composed, elegant. But her eyes weren't cold. They were fierce. She scanned me up and down, not with judgment, but with something deeper, protectiveness. And when she spoke, her voice didn't tremble. "You're the one carrying my granddaughter," she said. And then she opened her arms and pulled me in, like I was family. I collapsed into her, and for the first time in days, I let myself cry. What followed was a transformation I never could have imagined. They didn't just offer me a room, they gave me a home. The guest wing became my sanctuary. Doctors were brought in, nutritionists, therapists, personal attendants. Claudia oversaw everything herself. She said, "My grandchild will be born into strength, and so will you." She dressed me in silk and gave me back my dignity. She helped me sit straighter, speak louder, and believe that my pain didn't define me. It sharpened me. Noah's father, Victor, was stern at first, a businessman through and through. But after hearing what my parents did, and seeing how Noah looked at me, he softened. He took me into his study one evening, poured me a cup of mint tea, and said, "A woman who can walk through fire and protect her child is the kind of woman I want in this family." They weren't just billionaire royalty. They were survivors too. And they saw me not as baggage, but as blood. Weeks passed, my body changed, so did my spirit. I took prenatal yoga classes in the estate's sunroom. I read parenting books by the fireplace, and on quiet mornings, Claudia and I would walk the rose garden and talk about the kind of mother I wanted to be. Kind, yes, but unshakable, not like my own. Meanwhile, back in my old town, the narrative was falling apart. My parents had told neighbors I had moved away for a job. But rumors started spreading. A distant cousin saw a photo of me at a gala, wearing a crimson maternity gown, hand in hand with Noah. Diamonds glittering on my wrist. Whispers turned into questions. Who was this man? Where was Eliza now? Why did she look like she belonged in a palace? My sister, the only one still talking to me quietly over text, warned me. Mom saw the photos. She's furious. Dad's saying it's fake. They think you're lying. They want to talk to you. I ignored them. For the first time in my life, I had nothing to prove. Then came the baby shower. Claudia insisted on planning it. She flew in chefs from Italy, florists from France. A violinist played at the entry gates. Guests sipped champagne while walking through the estate's gardens, and every corner was decorated with symbols of rebirth. Butterflies, gold accents, soft pink and ivory blooms. I wore a custom gown, hair curled, skin glowing, and when the press quietly published photos from the event, the entire city took notice. And so did my parents. My sister texted again. "They're losing it. Dad's asking if you'll see them. They want to come to the estate." They said they were wrong. The day my parents came to the estate, the sky was a flat, colorless grey, like even the weather refused to take sides. Claudia had informed the staff ahead of time. They were guests, not family. I waited for them on the terrace, dressed in a flowing cream shawl that hugged my belly, now swollen with life. The vineyards stretched behind me like a crown. When their rental car crunched up the gravel path, I felt no nerves, only stillness. My father stepped out first, shoulders sunken, and my mother followed, overdressed and visibly uncomfortable. They approached with shaky smiles like the past hadn't happened, like they hadn't thrown me out 6 months pregnant without a penny or a question. My mother forced out a compliment about how well I looked, and my father asked if we could speak privately. Claudia, standing beside me like a guardian carved in stone, replied coolly, "Anything you say to Eliza, you say in front of me." Their rehearsed lines came next, talk of mistakes and misunderstandings, desperate attempts to rewrite history. I stayed silent until they tried to act like parents again, telling me they just wanted to be part of my life. That's when I stepped forward and said, "You didn't even ask her name." They stared, stunned. "She's due in 2 weeks. I continued, voice steady. "And you've never once checked if I was alive." Their eyes flickered, not with regret, but with embarrassment. I pressed on, reminding them that I had begged strangers for shelter while they pretended I didn't exist. My mother mumbled about being scared, and I cut her off with one cold truth. "You weren't scared. You were ashamed." The silence that followed felt like closure. I looked them in the eye, the same eyes that once looked through me, and told them to leave. They hesitated, hoping I'd bend. I didn't. Claudia gave the nod, and 2 guards emerged from the shadows of the garden path. My parents walked away slowly, reluctantly, their shoulders now even lower than when they arrived, and I watched them go, not with bitterness, but with peace. Because the daughter they threw out had become a woman they could never control again. 2 weeks later, my daughter was born under soft white lights, in a private suite, overlooking the Vineyard Hills. Her name was Amara, a name that meant grace and eternal, because that's exactly what she was. The moment I held her against my chest, I felt something break free inside me. A decades-old ache I'd carried for love I never received. But now, I was the one writing the rules. I was the warmth. I was the home. Claudia stood just outside the room, her eyes glistening with pride, and Noah never left my side. Not for a second. He kissed my forehead, then Amara's, and whispered, "This is what family feels like." And he was right. For the first time in my life, I was part of a family that didn't trade love for silence or demand perfection as payment. The Delacroix gave me more than protection. They gave me identity, legacy, and a seat at the table that my own blood denied me. In the weeks that followed, my parents tried to reach out. My sister told me they were suddenly interested in being involved grandparents. They sent gifts I never opened, left voicemails I never returned. But I had already made my choice. The kind of mother I wanted to be didn't have room for the people who abandoned her in her darkest hour. I didn't hate them. I didn't need to. They had to live with their decision. That was enough. And the world it noticed. Photos of Amara's birth announcement, wrapped in ivory lace beside a gold-rimmed bassinet, graced the pages of every society magazine. Not because we chased it, but because legacy speaks louder than gossip. I became more than just Noah's wife. I became a figure of grace and resilience. Someone women in the Delacroix Foundation looked to for leadership, for compassion, for strength. And I made sure every young mother the foundation supported knew one thing: she was never as alone as she felt. Sometimes, the people who are supposed to love you first are the ones who teach you exactly how not to love. But healing is a rebellion. Forgiveness is optional, and building a life without them. That's the sweetest revenge of all. My parents disowned me at 6 months pregnant, and I turned that pain into power. They raised a daughter they could control, but what they never saw coming was the woman I became without them.